Hi, I'm Jean Szulc and welcome. This is a video introduction into musical form, and we'll actually discuss some simple forms that you can use in your composition, and I'll explain how this is a tool that's very useful for you to plan ahead your music, and why this is actually a tool that allows you to evaluate how good of a material you're working with and how well it will all work together. If you haven't yet, I would recommend watching my last video, which is about motifs, phrases, periods, sentences, and phrase groups. It's very important that you do because those are the building blocks to what we're actually going to learn today. And if you don't know that, everything here will become more complicated. So it's very important that you learn all of that before. So just a quick disclaimer is that this video is based off two main books. First one is Arnold Schoenberg's Fundamentals of Music Composition, which is a very important book on the subject. And the second one is Wallace Berry's Form in Music, which is a lot simpler and allows you to understand the concepts quite easily. Just like in the last video, I also created a worksheet so that you can study all this stuff by your own later, right? So I have everything I created for this video written in there. I also have a little bit of an introduction into the Sonata form, which I won't get into this video because it is more complex, but it's just a quick introduction so that you can have like an idea of what a sonata means, like, which is a very important form. And I really do hope that you download this file because it has a little bit of a method so that you can study all of the forms that I will quote here in the video, right? So, and also there's a task which is writing a form of your own and composing something with it. The link is in the description. And also, like, if you did download it, don't forget to leave a comment saying that you did, because it really makes me glad when I see that what I created helped someone, and let's see how it works. Okay, so what exactly is musical form? Musical form is basically abstraction of how a song or a piece is constructed. When you're listening to music, you can probably realize that there are sort of like ideas that are repeated, there are ideas that aren't repeated, there are ideas that are changed within the song like many times. If you don't know form, it may sound random or it may sound very intuitive, right? So form is basically the study that allows you to abstract all of that and name all of those ideas, and allows you to actually organize them in almost like in a mind map or in a scheme, right? And why this is actually very useful is because, first of all, it allows you to listen to music more carefully and to understand what exactly the composer was doing when he decided to compose that. And second, it allows you to compose in a more organized fashion, because then you can plan ahead what is going on in your music and you can see how well it will work in the end with some degree of like precision. Alright, so this is what musical form actually means. The first form we are going to see today is the binary form. If you think about what binary means, it just means that there are two elements, or that an element is divided into two, right? And the thing about it is that in this form you have only two ideas, right? You have an A idea, which we call A because it's simpler to like assign a letter to it. It just makes it easier to abstract the whole thing. And then you have a B idea. What you can see usually is that as this is a small form, it only contains two small parts. What happens is that usually the A section and the B section are just like a period, a sentence, just one musical idea that we discussed in the last video. Alright, so this is a very small form, but it's very important that you actually keep it in mind, because it will be a part of what we will learn in the future when we are talking about like compound forms and like other bigger forms. So keep that in mind. Don't forget the binary form, although it is tiny. It is very useful. The next very important form is the ternary form. And as the binary form, ternary means three, right? So what usually happens is that you have two ideas. You don't have three ideas, but you repeat one idea at the end. So you have A, then you have B, and then you have like what we call like A thingy, like with a little line, just showing that it's not exactly the same A as before, right? So the idea is that In the binary form, it's basically like you're juxtaposing two ideas, which means you're gluing them together. You're just taking the two ideas and putting them one to the side of the other, but that doesn't necessarily create that much of a unity. So if you have like an A section and then a B section, and then you present the A section once again, then it's a lot more probable that the listener will understand the piece as a whole. So that we can understand how form works, like on a more practical scenario, we'll listen to one piece by Chopin. It's his Nocturne, Opus 15, number 1 in F major. It is a great example, in my opinion, because it is very clear. You can see the sections very, very clearly, especially because the sections are very different from one another. So let's listen to it really quickly. I won't show the entire piece because it's too long to put in the video, but you can listen to it by yourself, right? And you can identify it. Let's listen to the important parts and identify the sections. Okay, so now you listen to it and you know that there's this first idea which is very calm and it's almost mellow. It has like distinct accompanimental like ideas, like that figure that you can see throughout the entire movement, right? And it has a melody which is also distinct. It has its own rhythm, its own harmony. And then by the end of this section, you have like this transition in which the idea just decreases and it dies almost, like it fades into nothingness. And then you have like this explosive middle section, which is the B section. It's completely different. There's like a big differentiation between the ideas. And at the end of this, you have once again the A section. It's a little bit different. It has some different ornaments, but the important thing is that the idea is there. As I said, like there's usually some kind of difference between the first A and the second A, but like that's just up to the composer. Like when you are composing, you may change stuff up a little bit just so that it becomes better, or that it has a different effect the second time you listen to it. You don't have to be like as dramatic as Chopin was in this example. Like most examples don't have like that much like differentiation between ideas. Usually they are just two different melodies that aren't really that different, but there are a little bit different. So it's just important that you plan ahead your music and see what you actually need for each situation. Right, now, so this is where everything starts to get really interesting with the compound ternary form, because the compound ternary form, as you can see in its name, it has ternary in it. So its concept doesn't really change that much from the ternary form. If we look at it, it's basically a ternary form, right? It has A, B, and A, but where it gets really interesting, each different section has its own form, like it's composed of its own little form. So like you have A, which is A, B, A, and then B, you have a contrast, so you have like C, D, C, and then once again A, you have A, B, A, like tiny little A, B, A, and the thing is that it's exactly the same as the ternary form, except that you're expanding it to like another scale. What's very useful about this concept is that it doesn't really only apply to the ternary form. Like, and the compound ternary form is something that you see people talking about. Like, you don't usually see people talking about compound binary form, but the idea is that like a binary can also be divided into smaller fragments. So you can have like A and B, and then like you subdivide it however you want. And it's very important that you have this in mind, because if you think like about a long piece, it will probably have like a long distinction between forms, but also the like smaller sections in the music will be subdivided within themselves, right? So perhaps if you have like a 20-minute long piece, it will be simply a ternary form. Like you have an 8-minute first section, then like another 8-minute first section, and then you have like a smaller 4 minutes last section, right? But then of course, like you don't have a melody that lasts 8 minutes long, right? Because everyone would actually forget it, right? But then if you look at it, you have like a tiny little melody that takes like 20 seconds, and then you have like something else in between, and the forms just subdivide themselves until you have like a really big and effective long form. All right, so the next form is the rondo form, which is very interesting because it allows you to create a lot of variety within one piece. The concept of it is that you have like a theme or a rondo, which people call it like this is a rondo of the piece, which is a rondo also, which gets a little bit confusing, but it's just how it is. So it's just like you have a main idea, and then you have something else, and then you present the main idea once again, and then something else, and you always present your main idea between new ideas, right? So this is a rondo. We just like it can be expanded forever. So don't forget to use this form and use all the forms I've quoted until now, because that's just how you are going to get really acquainted with it. There are also forms which I won't talk about in here. There are like all sorts of forms. The thing is that there are forms that are more like historically like valuable than simply like an abstraction of the possibilities you can have in musical composition. So you have like minuets, scherzos, sonatas, you have like all sorts of forms. And the thing is that they are like more specific usually because they happened in a specific time zone in the past, right? So it made sense at the time, but like nowadays it for sure has its own value, but it doesn't necessarily has a value of its own other than a historical value. If you want to learn about different forms, I would recommend that you search about them on your own, and make sure that when you are studying a form you are actually thorough with it, because usually like forms may get a little bit confusing if there are historical aspects between them. Besides the actual sections in musical form, in the diagrams that I showed you, there are small extensions of form that don't really alter the form itself, but they actually make it work better. So you have introductions, you have transitions, you have codas, right? So the concept of all of those, an introduction is like something that comes before the form has actually started. And like, why would you have like an introduction is like a great question. Sometimes it takes time for the listener to get into the mood of a particular piece, right? So an introduction might take like 1 measure, or it might take like a bit, maybe really long. It might have like I don't know, 20 measures, depending on how big is the form. It's important that it's proportional to the form itself. So like if you have a 16 measure piece, then your introduction might have like 2 measure stops, because if not, it will become almost like an entire new section. Besides introductions, the transitions, it's whatever comes in between sections, right? So sometimes 2 ideas won't sound good if you just juxtapose them. Sometimes you need to have like something in between so that it creates a nicer flow. Usually if you're modulating into a different section, then you need a transition so that you have time for the listeners to get used to this new key you're in. Usually if you have 2 sections that have too much of a contrast between them, it's good that you have a transition between both, because then you will have like less jarring sounds. And finally you have codas and coderas, right? So a coda and a codera, they are basically the same thing, except that a codera is smaller, like it's just a small coda. But the thing about a coda and a codera is that they're exactly the same as an intro, but in the end they just try to conclude the piece a bit more. And what makes all of this actually work is that usually those sections or those extensions of form, they don't have that much material or like ideas that are too distinct on themselves, because the thing is that they are supposed to serve the form itself and not add to it, right? They are supposed to make the form flow nicer and work nicer, but like they are not supposed to be another section, right? So it's important that those sections, if you feel like you need something in between two sections or something in the beginning or the end, it's important that you construct it in a way that it doesn't actually add something else, but it just gives closure, gives an introduction, you know, it's there to serve a purpose and not be something within itself. Of course, when it comes to form, you can create your own form. So like if you have like 3 different ideas, you can organize them in many different ways. You can have like your A idea, and then you have B, and then you have C, and then you have A once again, and then B, and then A. And this is just a form that I created just as an example. I've never used it. But when it comes to form, it's also important that you adapt forms to what you need and not simply take the forms that you already know and just apply them everywhere. You know, not all pieces have to have a very specific or very common form. You can go crazy about it. There's a lot of stuff you can create with the simple ideas. And I would recommend you creating a form of your own. That's why in the worksheet I created for you guys, there's like the last section in the first page, it's called a form of your own, and I want you to write down the form that you created and you compose something with it, just so that you can get used to creating your own forms. And like a last tip and like thing I can teach you, like it's just really important when it comes to form, is that although we are naming the sections with like very direct and strict names like A, B, A, they usually have a purpose. They are not simply like thrown in there. Like you can't just create diagrams and hope all of them to work. But the thing is that they within themselves have some sort of purpose, right? So if you think about a ternary form, the first section is introducing an idea. The second one is creating contrast, and the last one is usually bringing like the initial idea back, so that you have like a better balance, right? So you have something that feels like home, you have contrast, and then you come back to home. Don't forget to, like, whenever you are creating your own forms, try to think about something that makes sense, not only as a form, but as like a diagram or as like a logic to your piece. So for example, sometimes you want to have a very stale initial section, so you have like ABA and you don't have much contrast between all those ideas. But then you have another completely different section, which is like CDE. And then this section is completely different from everything else, and every small idea is different from each other, and like there's a lot of like difference between everything, right? So you have like this stale, sparse section, and then suddenly you have this completely alive and maybe even awkward, intentionally awkward section, right? So you think it through and think what actually makes sense for you and for the particular context you're composing in. Alright, so if you haven't watched my last video, don't forget to watch it, because it's really important. Perhaps if you didn't get something, you will get it after watching the last video, which is it just gives a little bit of the basics into musical form. So also if you want to receive more, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, because I will post a lot more content just like this, just important tutorials and stuff that will help you compose and become a better composer. And don't forget to leave a comment down below if it helped you in any way, because it makes me really glad to see that it helped someone. Like what I'm doing actually helps people. And thank you for watching until the end. I'll see you next time.